Good evening, everybody. This is Darius Assemi, your host at GV Wire Unfiltered, with another great episode coming to you live from Fresno, California. We have a great panel with us this evening to discuss a lot of geopolitical issues, including some of the stuff happening in our own backyards here in our country relating to ICE. Uh, our guests, Tom Knowles, retired FBI International Operation and Law Enforcement Specialist. Alison Weir, author, activist, and founder of If Americans Knew, and Kathy Shihada, Alison Weir assistant with If Americans Knew. We did invite Pastor Franklin to join us this evening. He's got a lot of information and his own opinions on the Middle East issues, Israel, Palestine, Zionism. He's very active on issues relating and supporting of Israel, but we did not hear back from Pastor Franklin. Okay, before we dive in and bring this awesome, by the way, Bill McEwen, my news director, our news director, is on the show as well. Good evening, Bill. We'll have commentary throughout. We have a few polls to share with you, and then we're gonna bring in Tom Knowles and discuss. First, we're going to show you a brief video on the local protest, not an ICE, local protest. Has a combination of few issues on it, and then I'm going to bring in Tom for comments on ICE. Okay, the first poll. Do you think President Trump is justified in spending an estimated $45 million of taxpayer money on a military parade that is on his birthday? I think the word birthday got missed on that question. The answer was no. 27% said yes, spend the $45 million. Okay, next poll. Should the U.S. send weapons and troops to Israel for the war against Iran? We're much closer to that today, or right now at 6 p.m. Pacific, than we were yesterday or last week. But 75% of the respondents said no to sending U.S. weapons and troops to Israel or to the region for the war against Iran. Who is most responsible for the current conflict between Israel and Iran? Iran. A slight majority said Iran because of its nuclear bomb aspirations, and then followed by Israel and United States of its unconditional support of Israel. And 10% said, well, all of the above. With that, we're going to switch over to a video on Fresno protests. Fresno protesters rally against Trump administration on No King's Day. Let's watch that brief video.
Thousands of protesters filled the streets of Fresno Saturday, speaking out against President Donald Trump and his administration's policies. They gathered at two main locations, Blackstone and Knowles in Shaw and Fresno, holding signs and chanting against federal budget cuts, layoffs, and what they say are attacks on important government services. The protests were part of an international event called No King's Day, which coincided with Flag Day and Trump's 79th birthday. The day also saw a $45 million military parade in Washington, D.C., which many protesters criticized as a waste of money and a symbol of authoritarianism. At the Blackstone and Knowles protest, organizer Myra Coble said veterans in Fresno are waiting weeks for care at the VA, even as millions are spent on the parade.
Donald Trump doesn't respect the Constitution, he doesn't respect the courts, he doesn't respect Congress. You know, we have a system of 3 branches of government, and he thinks it's all about him and that he can just, rule the whole thing like a king. So that's why we have the theme out here, no kings. We don't have kings in this country.
Marine Corps veteran Horst Tosti echoed those concerns, calling the parade unnecessary and criticizing cuts to veteran services.
So I'm just here to show support. I have an opinion that if the administration is going to withhold money from California, then us being a donor state, what's the point of being in the union? If us seceding would save us roughly $80 billion? Yeah. I love my country, I fought for it, but this isn't the country that I fought for.
Nadra von Ion, who came from Iran as a political refugee, said she was there to stand with undocumented immigrants and others impacted by these policies.
I was a refugee to Europe, and then I migrated to United States myself about 30 years ago. And I know the path was very difficult, but back then we didn't have all this rhetoric, and I was supported through United Nations. And because of that, I had the opportunity to come to United States and study, become a registered nurse, and serve this country, which is my country now because I'm a citizen, for the past 30 years as a registered nurse. And I am hoping that we do give this opportunity to many other people.
Organizers say more protests will happen in the coming weeks. Reporting in Fresno, I'm Anthony Haddad.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, for that. And there's, we had a retired Marine that spoke up against some of the activities of ICE. And my guess is there's a lot of other folks that want to speak up, but they're concerned about speaking up. They're retired from government, whether it's Justice Department, immigration control, Marines, et cetera, that don't want to lose their pensions. They don't want to lose, some of their benefits. So they're not speaking up. With that, let me bring in our retired FBI International Operation and Law Enforcement Specialist, Tom Knowles. Tom, welcome back to Unfiltered. What are your comments on the protests and also really the ICE arrests? Some of these about the people they're arresting, majority, I'm thinking if not all, are here illegally. They crossed the border illegally. They came here, but also without their help. I don't know what's going to happen to our economy. There's 10 to 11 million undocumented. The numbers are probably another 3 or 4 million above that. I think majority of Americans agree that criminals, should be deported. Okay, so what is a criminal? A violent criminal should be deported. But so many of these folks do jobs that most Americans, a majority of Americans, don't want to do. Picking our, fruit, our vegetables, cleaning restaurants, hotels, in the construction industry, so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on what's happening with these arrests?
Darius, I wrote a short piece here recently about this, and it's ironic that you basically have just set forth many of the same comments that I made, in that growing up in California, in Central California, we provide over 50% of all of the fruits and nuts, and a lot of the country has a field day with that comment alone. But the food that the people eat, and most Americans, being someone who's been assigned to several different states in our great nation, they don't understand. They think of California, they think of San Francisco and LA. They don't understand the agriculture in this area. They know about the tech industry, but they don't understand the support structure that these immigrants provide. And someone who grew up with a grape vineyard in my backyard, and all of my friends were either farmers or came from families of immigrants, field workers. Most people have just no comprehension as to how hard these immigrants work and the type of work that they perform out here. And you hit it right on the nail. These are not jobs that Americans will do. There is a reason why we have to hire people outside of our own country, because Americans just won't do that work, period. And you have so many of these farmers now that are absolutely freaking out. They have been the last few years because of the way immigration has tightened up. They cannot get the crews to pick the crops. And I heard the president just yesterday on a brief statement that he made, saying now they're reevaluating this, whether they don't want the farmers to be short. They don't want the hotel industry to be short. I mean, come on. This is a country of 360 million people. These are policies that should be thought out, planned out, not just implemented on a whim. And that's what I see here. Going after the criminals, 40 years of law enforcement, I support it 1,000%. But that is not what's happening here.
Thank you, Tom. Before I bring Bill McEwen on, the part of the challenge, we talked about this last week and the week before, is our government, both Democrats and Republicans, are not addressing the immigration. They're not working on immigration reform. We're not addressing immigration, legal immigration into our country, so that folks know, okay, here's the process, and it'll take me a month, a year, whatever it is, based on a quota on the needs of our country, whether it's labor, brain power, or investors, or whatever it may be. Government really lack of addressing these issues, but not addressing the needs of industry. That if there was no jobs, there was no demand for these folks, they wouldn't be coming here. And that's really the shame that our government is not addressing the demands of the industry and not doing comprehensive immigration reform. We had Councilmember Arias here last week or the week before, and he said, listen, if we can get immigration reform, every member of Congress that is not supporting comprehensive immigration reform should be replaced. With that, I'm going to bring in Bill McEwen, our news director. Bill, you're on mute, by the way, Bill.
Just a quick comment. President Trump has changed his mind again, so the ICE raids are back on for farms, restaurants, packing houses, slaughterhouses, and the like. You can read the story on GV Wire. Tom, I have a simple question for you. Thousands of Fresnans turned out in protest at various locations, the No Kings protest. Are they being kept track of? In other words, if you go to a protest, are you being videotaped by someone from the FBI or someone from DOJ? And to your knowledge, is there an enemies list, or are they compiling people that voice opposition to the Trump administration?
Tom, any thoughts on you? I know you're retired from the FBI. Would FBI actually create a list like that? People that are showing up at protests. I mean, ordinary American citizens.
During my tenure, absolutely not. In fact, it's illegal. I mean, you have to be able to justify why you're out there taking action of any sort like that. Both under they would try to pursue it maybe under a domestic terrorism, but even with a domestic terrorism caption, you have to be able to justify any activities that you're taking. And just to go out and randomly be taking photographs of people and going in and identifying, compiling a list in my past lifetime, I would say absolutely not. That's insane. Let's face it, back in the 60s during the Vietnam era, that was happening some. But then actions were taken to make sure, laws were written to make sure that that didn't happen any further. And while I was in working international terrorism, not going to belabor this, but it got so bad that we couldn't, if we knew a group of individuals were meeting to discuss acts of terrorism and they were inside of a religious location, we couldn't even copy down the license plates of the cars outside of this religious institution for fear that they were in there practicing their religion and not meeting for terrorism purposes. Now, that was changed. That allowed us to do that, but it was still, the rules were very, very tight. They're very strict on what the government can be in there doing. Under this today's environment, don't have any firsthand knowledge that that's occurring. I would sure as hell hope that it has not gone to that extreme.
Did you make a phone call to verify that, Tom? I'm kidding.
I know.
Okay.
I know you can, because you know I'm not going to.
Yes, that's right. Okay, let me, before we move on to bring in on Alison Weir, and again, we invited Jim Franklin of the Cornerstone Church, who's very outspoken on some of the issues in the Middle East, especially pro-Israeli, and he did not respond to the invitation. Comments, Becky Wharton, how many immigrants are on public assistance? No, illegal immigrants are on public assistance. Inga Schlegel, Bill, the video that was done at January 6th, that videotaping was done at January 6th, and that's how they tracked down many and arrested them. Okay. How many illegals are on public assistance? That's a good question. I don't think anybody on this panel has the answer to that, but that's a good question. Now, also, how many of them pay taxes, and how many of them have been here more than a decade and they still can't get lawful citizenship? 59% house. Okay, I'm going to skip that. All right. With that, let me bring in Alison Weir, who is the author and activist and founder of If Americans Knew. We're running a little bit behind, Alison, so maybe in the next 5 to 7 minutes, kind of give us a background on your background and also your involvement in Israel and Palestine and your experiences, and what do you want to share with the GVWire Unfiltered. It's a hot topic, obviously geopolitical issue. Why should Americans care? A lot of our taxpayer dollars are being spent in that region. We have many American bases. A lot of the U.S. oil used to come from that region decades ago, not anymore. But a lot of the European oil supply comes from the Persian Gulf. And of course, now Israel is not the Persian Gulf, it's on the Mediterranean, but all connected with over 300 million Arabs living around Israel. So with that, Alison, welcome to Unfiltered, and kind of take it away.
Thank you for having me. I'm actually a journalist more. I really don't consider myself an activist. I began in journalism, and that's my focus. By the way, and you just mentioned the money to Israel and the American connections. In 2024, American taxpayers gave Israel $63 million per day. $63 million per day to a very tiny, quite wealthy country. Most people don't know that because the US media hardly ever mention it. But if you look at the Congressional Research Service, that's completely accurate. What happened with me is I'm just a sort of normal, average American, I feel. My background is journalism. I was the editor of a small weekly newspaper back in 2000. And that's the time when what's called the Second Intifada began in the Palestinian territories and in Israel. Intifada just means throwing off of oppression. It just means shaking off. So that was in the news for a bit that fall, 2000. And just out of curiosity, my youngest son had just started college, so I had more time. I started following the news coverage on Israel-Palestine. I'd never looked into it before. Like many Americans, I'm very sympathetic to Israel. We're very aware of the Holocaust. But I'd never studied that issue and knew very little about it. So I started following the newspaper coverage and especially radio coverage, etc. And after a while, as a journalist, I noticed that I was getting very one-sided coverage. I was noticing that we heard from and about Israelis in great detail, as I wanted. But then we almost never heard from and about Palestinians, certainly not in the equivalent quantity and detail. So, I wanted the full story, and I could see that we were not getting it. Google and the internet was just becoming to be available to people like me. So I decided to do some searches and see what I could find. And I discovered that there were excellent reports from the region itself. There were Israeli newspapers online, there were Palestinian media, there were many human rights people there that were giving firsthand real-time accounts of what was going on in fall of 2000. And I learned that large numbers of unarmed protesters, Palestinian protesters, were being shot every day. Many of them were children being shot in the head, large numbers. And this was being covered up in the news reports. When I listened to NPR or the New York Times or the San Francisco Chronicle, they weren't reporting on that. So after a few months of looking into this more and more, I became pretty astounded at what I was finding. I felt that this was the biggest cover-up I had ever seen, and we've all, by my age, I've seen a lot of them, but this seemed like the biggest one. So I quit my job. I was in Sausalito, and I traveled over to Gaza and the West Bank in early 2001, February and March of 2001. Traveled around by myself with my notebook and a small camera throughout the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and I saw what was going on. I saw entire neighborhoods were bullet riddled. In some places, it reminded me of pictures I'd seen of World War II. Just entire neighborhoods were in ruins. This was in early 2001, before 9/11, before Hamas had come to power, before a single rocket had been fired from Gaza. It was like that. I saw children that had been shot, often in the back. One little boy had been shot in the head. I found that all you had to do was go to the nearest hospital, and you saw people and many children who had been shot by Israeli soldiers. And these were children in their own neighborhoods. And, some people, the way the news reports give it, they think that Palestinians are invading Israel. These were in Gaza, in Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza City, Bethlehem was being shelled, places in the West Bank, Ramallah. So this was so intense. I was in the home of a little boy who had just been killed by soldiers. I saw the parents when they got back from the hospital, saw the mother weeping and weeping and weeping. So after traveling around and seeing for myself what was going on, I took photographs of a lot of this. When I came back to the United States, I decided that I needed to tell Americans what was going on. So I created an organization and a website that's journalistic. It's not ideological, it's not left-wing, it's not right-wing, it's just here the facts that all Americans need to know. It's our tax money, it's our government. We vote for the people that will represent us and form our policies. And if we don't know what's going on, our votes will be uninformed. So we started an organization called If Americans Knew. It wasn't if liberals knew, if Democrats knew, if Republicans knew, if Muslims or Jews or Christians knew. It was just for all Americans. Since that time, I've written many articles. I've written a book. I discovered that I've read dozens and dozens of books on the issue. I've gone back to the region a number of times. I've interviewed many people in the U.S. State Department, a variety of people. And as I was doing this, I discovered that there had been a movement to create Israel in this country called Zionism, a Zionist movement. Most Americans I've found, and I was one of them, really had never heard of Zionism. I had never heard of Zionism. I talked to some friends at a college reunion of my college class several years ago and found that when I asked people, do you know what Zionism is? Most people said, I think I've heard of it. What is that? And yet what I've discovered is an ideology and a movement that has greatly impacted our country and the world. And that the Zionist movement to create a Jewish state in Palestine began activities in the United States in the late 1900s, actually the late 1800s. There were already 20,000 Zionists in the United States. By 1920, there were about 200,000. They were very active, especially in the larger cities on the East Coast. And they were already, as one historian wrote, they were already becoming persuasive in those areas. So there was a Zionist movement in this country that I had never heard of. I was born here. My parents were born here. Some of my grandparents were born here. Some were immigrants. But it's been very, very significant. And most people have never heard of that, didn't know what was going on, didn't know how the U.S. was actually used to create Israel. There was a secret society I discovered that was written about in a Jewish Historical Quarterly, wrote an article about it. So there's a huge story about all of this. And what people often are seeing in the media today is they think that this all started with on October 6th with an attack on Israel, without knowing that for decades there had been Israeli attacks on Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, and that many, many more Palestinians have been killed throughout these periods than Israelis. But our organization did a number of media studies, and we found that typically, for example, CBS and NBC were, in 2001, that was the beginning of that second intifada, were covering Israeli deaths at the rate about 13 times more than they were covering Palestinian deaths. So NPR was similar, not quite as bad. They would have about one story about an Israeli death and one story about a Palestinian death. So it seemed like neutral, balanced reporting. In reality, that meant they were covering 90% of the Israeli deaths and 20% of the Palestinian deaths. So it was very manipulative reporting.
Alison, let me kind of fast forward to because we have just a couple more minutes, and I want to move on to what's happening today with Israel and Iran, and I have a few comments on that as an Iranian immigrant. Any thoughts on what's happening today on Israeli Gaza war on Gaza, which is really Gaza is demolished? How do you see this thing unfolding? Do you have any thoughts on how Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side? Is there an opportunity for them to live peacefully side by side? Or there's a lot of talk about basically removing all 2.2 million Palestinians from that area and placing them in other Arab countries. The Arab countries have said, no, we're not going to take them. And even though there's lots of Palestinian refugees in many Arab countries, including Jordan. And maybe in 1 minute or less, how do you see this thing ending, the Palestinian Gaza issue? I'm sorry, the Israeli Gaza issue. What do you see? What do you see happening to the 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza, and also another 2 or 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, which is several, at least a dozen miles, if not over 100 miles away?
It's important for people to realize that when I was, and maybe some of you, there was no Israel at all. It didn't exist. So Israel was created by this massive colonization by people from around the world, mostly from Europe, came in. They took over a lot. They took over what had been Palestine. They got 78% of what was Palestine. Many of the people were forced out, and a large number of them lost their land, lost their homes, lost their businesses, lost their farms, were ruthlessly, there are a number of massacres, were pushed into the Gaza Strip. So the people that are living in Gaza now, about 70% of them, might be as high as 80%, are families whose land was stolen by Israel and are now living in poverty in Gaza. Israel has attacked Gaza many, many times. The effort has been for many years. Israel was created, as an Israeli historian has pointed out, by ethnic cleansing. In 1947 to 1949, there was a war, they call it the War of Independence. In reality, it was a war to push out the portion of the population that was non-Jewish, which was originally 90% of about 85% of the population. So the effort had been to push it out to make it a Jewish state. And there sort of have been two basic outlooks in the Israeli government. One group, the hardcore, wants to get rid of all Palestinians. They've wanted to do this for a long time, both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The other, softcore, just wants to let them have a small amount of land, basically Bantustans, call that Palestine, pretend it's a Palestinian state, and that's how they would solve it.
Okay.
So right now, there's the effort to push out all of the Gazans, kill many of them, push out many of them. I don't know. They had lived together in peace back when I was born and before that time. That could happen again. It could have happened again. It's hard to see how it can happen now.
Thank you for that question. A quick question, and then I'm going to move to Iran. Question from John Dion. I have a question for Ms. Weir. How do anti-Semitism and racism get so conflated? And there's all the question of what is anti-Semitism? What is the definition of a Semite? Isn't Arabs and people that live in that area are Semites? So can you maybe, if you know that, maybe address that question? What is this Semitism? What's anti-Semitism? And then how is that conflated with racism? Maybe in 1 minute or less, because we got to move on.
Well, anti-Semitism is actually prejudice against Jewish individuals, prejudice or bigotry or hostility against Jewish individuals. That's the classic definition when the word was coined in the late 1800s. That's what it meant. Even though Semite can mean both, that's what the word means. It means specifically the Jewish population. However, there's been an effort for many years to conflate any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, even though there are a number of Israelis and many Jewish Americans who criticize Israel. But now they have come up with a new definition that's been embedded in the State Department and countries around the world on campuses, so that there's a new definition of anti-Semitism that's centered on Israel. So criticism of Israel is in many cases considered anti-Semitism, and the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, keeps saying there's increased anti-Semitism. In reality, they mean that there are growing numbers of people who don't like mass slaughter of children.
Got it. Thank you for that. Okay, with that, I'm going to move over to Iran and Israel, and I'm going to bring in Tom Knowles here in a minute to opine on. I mean, he was the international representative from that managed. I don't want to say managed that part of the world, but knows a lot about that part of the world, and law enforcement specialist, worldwide law enforcement specialist. So let me thank you, Alison, but please don't go away, because I'm sure you're going to have comments on what I'm about to say. Okay, so let me start off by saying Iranians, by and large, despise the Ayatollahs who rule that country and who rule them, especially outside of Iran and also inside of Iran. There was a poll done in 2024. Let's just put the poll up. That shows 92% of Iranians that are very dissatisfied with their current conditions inside Iran. Okay, the top issue, of course, high prices and inflation, not a whole lot different than what happened in the United States, been happening in our country the last few years. Unemployment, addiction, and corruption. They protest multiple times a year. Iranians do. Most of the time, we don't see or hear the protests. You can take the slide off. Let's put on our next slide. But Iranians, we don't hear. I'm sorry, not that slide. Let's go to the protests from. Actually, no. You know what? Keep that slide. This is a few pictures of Iran that we have for most folks that not familiar with that part of the world. This is a ski resort just north of Tehran. But Iranians protest multiple times a year, but the Western media doesn't cover most of the protests that are happening in that part of the world. You know what? Let's remove the slides for now. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Iranians are not allowed to carry guns. And so when there's protests, a few get arrested, a few get killed, a bunch get thrown in jail, and the arrests stop. Most Americans don't remember Iran of the 1960s and 70s, vibrant, high economic growth, great relations with the West, a lot of great activities. We'll put pictures of those later on. And Iran can again become that. But revolution that happened in 1979 in Iran removed the Shah, who was a dictator at the time, but a great ally of the United States, and replaced him. The revolution basically removed the Shah, and these Ayatollahs took office. And there's been a lot of discontent in that country since 1979. And Iran, who was one of the most aggressively upwardly mobile country in the League of Nations, has become a pariah. Again, I want to reiterate, Iranians cannot carry guns. So when there's protest inside Iran, they can't do a whole lot. And of course, most of the cell phone technology and cell towers is controlled by the government, so they shut those down, arrest a bunch of folks, and on we go. So some of you remember there was a protest. This was back in 2022. Mahsa Amini got killed um, by the police, what we call it, the morality police in Tehran, which sparked a lot of protests nationwide for almost a year. Not a whole lot, unfortunately, came of that, and that was really a missed opportunity. If there was an opportunity to help bring down the regime, and I want to talk about that here in a minute, that was the time to actually help the Iranian people. Similar protests happened in Iran after former Iranian President Ahmadinejad got reelected. That was in 2009. A lot of protests. Actually, I don't need that slide up yet. But that protest, which happened in 2009, nationwide for several weeks. Unfortunately, the West and the United States or Israel did not get involved to help the Iranian people against this regime. And the debate inside Iran was that the elections were fraudulent, and the results were declared 2 minutes or 5 minutes after the polls closed, and there was a lot of corruption, and the wrong person got reelected, which was the former Iranian president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So the best way, by the way, to get rid of let me just hold on one second. Yeah, the best way to get rid of Iranian nuclear program, if it has a weapons program for nuclear bombs, is to allow the Iranian people to be organized, to get armed, and let the Iranians overthrow the Ayatollahs. Again, 92% of Iranians are, despise the conditions that they're living in. Many of them cannot leave the country for a variety of reasons. Very difficult to get into that country. But really, if we're serious about regime change in Iran, let the Iranians do it. Let the Iranians make that decision. Help them, because we know when a country gets attacked by outside forces, it immediately galvanizes, I'm not saying everybody in the country, but a lot of folks in the country behind the current ruling party. We saw a great example of this when George W. Bush was elected into office in 2001. His popularity rating was, in the 50s, low 50, and then right after 9/11, the numbers spiked up to over 90%, to close to 90% for quite a while. And that's what, of course, happened after September 11th of 2001, the terrorist attacks on our soil. So the fastest way to galvanize a country behind the ruling party is going to be to attack it. That's why, in my opinion, so important to help Iranians work and do the work. Many Iranians are very discontented with the current regime, their economic conditions, and that's really in my opinion, the appropriate way of making sure Iran does not get nuclear weapons. Majority of Iranians don't care about nuclear weapons, about the Middle Eastern hegemony of influence in other parts of the Middle East. Now, are Iranians sympathetic with what's happening in Gaza and Palestine? There's no polling on that, but my guess is yes. Like a lot of folks across the world, we've seen protests in Europe, Northern Europe, and South America against what's taking place, against the Palestinians in Gaza since October 9th or 10th of a couple of years ago. So again, there's missed opportunities in Iran to do to work on making sure Iran doesn't develop nuclear weapons. Now, for those of you like the background, more background on Iran, there's a great documentary called The American Coup. It's about a 1-hour documentary that we don't have an image of it. If Paul can track that down, we can add a slide. The American Coup, but it's about maybe 7 to 10 years old. It's about 1-hour documentary, talks about the 1953 overthrow of a democratically elected government of Iran by the CIA, because the Brits mainly, who wanted to get a big royalty on Iranian oil, they couldn't negotiate a deal and force Iran to give the Brits a royalty on Iran's oil. So they convinced Dwight Eisenhower to basically, according to this documentary, to mount a coup and get the CIA involved to replace the government with the Shah of Iran, who became a dictator. One of the fastest growing economies, but don't speak against the ruling party, because the Shah at the time, because you may disappear. So what's the problem with Iran having nukes? Israel has had them for over 40 years. So what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. Iranian President Ahmadinejad, let's put that slide back up now, makes a comment. I think this was over 10 or 15 years ago, that says Israel is, you can read that, that should be wiped off. Again, this is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's, president of Iran's, comments that Israel should not exist, basically. He said that in 2009. And that his quote is on the screen. So when you make those comments and then start developing a nuclear weapon, or I'm sorry, nuclear program, that creates, I'm sorry, there's some background noise. Please mute if you're not speaking. Okay, and I'm going to get to Alison here in a minute. But if you make those comments, Israel being an ally of the United States, according to a lot of people, a lot of money was spent helping build Israel. Whether you agree or disagree with that, Israel is a U.S. ally, and when a country that produces oil comes out and makes those comments, the president makes those comments, and now they're developing a nuclear program. Now, Donald Trump did tear up the nuclear agreement that the United States and several European countries, I believe Russia and China was part of that deal. He basically got rid of it in 2017 or 2018. So that Iran has been kind of on its own for a while. And that's the problem. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said several times, I think that's early as 2012, 2015, or 2018, that Iran is weeks, if not months, if not weeks away from a nuclear program, a nuclear weapon. And now, according to some experts, Iran is, or has been in the last few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks away from developing enriched uranium enough for a nuclear weapon, maybe more than one nuclear bomb. So that's the issue, folks. Majority of Iranians we just want to go about our own way. Iranians are having problems putting food on the table, putting gas in their car. They don't want any money spent on anything outside of Iran. They want, for them, it's Iran first. Spend money on our country, fix the roads, fix the infrastructure, fix healthcare, instead of spending all these dollars in all these countries, whether it's Hamas or Lebanon or whatever it may be. Or Syria. Iran helped Bashar Assad in whatever that was, in the big, longest civil war in that country, to support Bashar Assad. So those are Iranians, again, want to live a peaceful life. They don't want to be involved in geopolitical issues, and they want to return back to an Iran that was economically vibrant and successful. Now, should the U.S. get involved and support Israel attack of Iran? That has got a whole set of ramifications. The poll that we put up, let's put that poll back up. 75% of the respondents said no, United States should not be involved. Let's put the poll back up. There we go. Should not send weapons and or troops to Israel for the war against Iran. But it looks like that may be happening with President Trump, who, by the way, got into office, say we should not be involved in foreign wars. We want to bring all of our troops back, and we shouldn't spend money. It needs to be America first, not other countries. And let me pull up one more slide by Representative Marjorie Taylor. Where is that slide? Which slide number is that? Let's put that up by Marjorie Taylor Greene, which is slide 26. There you go. She opposes Trump support for Israeli strike on Iran, and she articulated this. This was a few days ago, a couple of days ago, on her Twitter feed. You can go read that. That's Marjorie Taylor Greene, representative of in Congress. So, what's going to happen to the oil fields? Would Iran retaliate, blow up oil fields? Would the price of oil go up? Right now, the oil markets are not pricing that in. And again, the fastest way to organize a country is to kill civilians by an outside force, whether it's Israel or the United States, and destroy its infrastructure. So let Iranians do this work if they're interested. And once the Council of Guardians is no longer in power, Iran can have its own democracy, can decide who wants to run for office. Iranians will, instead of this small group of ayatollahs. So with that, Alison has a question. I'm going to get your question quickly, or your comment, and then I have an important question about how many Middle East wars have we been involved in, and how many have we won? We don't have the cost to the U.S. taxpayer. We don't have it for this show. And what was it? Civilian death and U.S. armed forces death. But before I bring Tom Knowles to discuss those items, Alison, you had a comment or question? You're on mute, Alison. Let me bring Tom in while Alison we can figure out Alison's microphone issues. Tom, how many Middle East wars have we been engaged in, and have we won any of them?
By the way, I'm unmuted now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me address Tom first, and then we'll come back to Alison. Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Well, the exact number I can't tell you, but I can just tell you in my lifetime, let's say in the last 40 years, if you look at our track record really has not been good. We've gone in with just incredible, great intentions to save people, to save countries, and it really has not worked out well. We have figured out a way to go in and get involved, but we have had a very difficult time trying to figure a way to stop wars and to pull out gracefully. I mean, look at Afghanistan. That's the most typical, and I go back as far as Vietnam. I mean, we just have not had good luck. Look at Libya. We have had so many regime changes over there, and things have not turned out well. So, and I'm not saying that we should or shouldn't necessarily be involved in this. It's a very precarious situation right now because of comments, and not just comments alone, actions. And actions speak louder than words. The actions that Iran has played over the last 25-year period in supporting groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, PIG. I mean, there's just so many groups that they're out there actively supporting, and that are still calling for the destruction of Israel. and killing American troops and attacking American troops. I mean, this goes on today. But getting back to the old saying of, actions have consequences. President Trump, during his last administration, when he canceled and pulled us out of the 5-country agreement, and you were right, Darius, it was Russia, China, United States, Britain, France, and Germany, the 5-country agreement, who actually worked out an Iran nuclear program that Iran agreed to, and it was to monitor them. And it was only good till 1935, but it allowed Iran to build nuclear reactors for peaceful purposes, for power, for energy. They have a right to do that. They just couldn't enrich it any further than that. We had monitors, we had humans on the ground, we had cameras in all of their facilities. Like I said, they were cooperating. Was it the best agreement? No, it had a short-term limit on it, but you got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end of any negotiations. It was a start. It was allowing us to be in there and to watch them. And for whatever reason, President Trump at that time said, this is one of the worst agreements I've ever seen, and he pulls us out. What is he doing today? Today, right now, as we speak, other than sending aircraft carriers and troops back into that region, he's trying to negotiate with the Iranians on a new agreement. We shouldn't be negotiating a new agreement. We should still have another 9, 10 years left of the agreement that was already in operation. He should have never pulled us out. It was one of those off-the-cuff, last-minute decisions or quick decisions that he made without proper consultation with the world, not just Americans, not just American politicians, with at least the 4 other countries. Right now, if we were still in that agreement and Iran was violating the nuclear deal, you would have the United States and 4 other countries getting ready to take action against Iran, not Israel and not the United States. And I can't blame Israel for the position they're in right now, because we have lost the ability to monitor their program. And if their intelligence is correct and they are getting that close, or they do have enough of the enriched fuel to start building the nuclear weapons, then yes, it is a very, very, very big problem, and not one that you can just win by air power. You can't just go in there and bomb the hell out of them and say, okay, we finished this. It can't be done. The Nazis learned that back in World War II. You can't just bomb. At some point, you got to put boots on the ground. And do we really want to go that direction here?
Great points. Thank you for that great perspective. Bill McEwen just told me that the cost of wars in the Middle East since 2001 is estimated to be at least $8 trillion, according to Brown University. Is that correct, Bill? And Bill is on mute. Yes, he's saying yes, that is correct. Okay. Allison, it sounds like your microphone is back on. Let me bring Allison. It sounds like Kathy has a comment as well. And we're kind of running a little bit late, so let's keep the comments short, or the questions short, please.
Yes, thank you very much. There's only 6 minutes left. So
we can go over a little bit. There's a lot of folks and a lot of comments, so we're gonna go over a little bit. Yes.
Because there's a lot that's been ignored. The Shah, as you know, was a very ruthless dictator. His Secret Service, had torture centers. There was a reason that he was overthrown. This was, we might not like who did it, but this was a popular revolution against the oppression that Iranians were living under, many of them. There were some that were very affluent, that were, doing quite well, very happy, and the West loved it. But they were overthrown by the people. This was not a regime change war. This was the Iranians that did that. There have been a number of different, Ahmadinejad was hardcore, but there have been others that were, not so hardcore since that time. The US and other agencies consistently say that Israel is not developing a nuclear weapon. Israel has been claiming for 30 years that they're just weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon. They've been saying the same thing for decades. The unanimous version from everybody is that they're not doing it. They're enriching waste. For a while, there was a complaint by the international agency about it, that Israel wasn't being as open as they should be, but they did not say that it was developing a nuclear weapon. So that that claim is inaccurate. The other thing is that what Iran was doing that many of us applaud is it was one of the few places that supported Palestinian human rights. During all this time, there's been great oppression in Gaza and the West Bank and inside Israel itself. This has been going on for a great deal of time. I've been there, I've studied it. This is 20 years of studying that I'm speaking from. Very few people wanted to, there's a very powerful pro-Israel lobby in this country, so most people don't speak out. Similarly, in Europe, there's a pro-Israel lobby in Europe. The Gulf states, the Arab world, the leaders talk about it, but they don't do anything. So one of the few countries that actually stood up, the Egyptian government used to stand up for Palestinians. They were bought off with a peace treaty that the US paid for. So we're now paying Egypt huge amounts of money, millions of dollars every year to buy them out from supporting human rights for Palestinians. The Jordanian government was bought off by our tax money. Another agreement was made a few decades ago with Jordan in which they would keep getting money from the US taxpayers, which they do every year. These are the two other countries after Israel that got lots of our money, and it's to buy them off from supporting Palestinians. So the Iranian regime may or may not be problematic in a lot of ways, the way a lot of places around the world, the way the Shah was. But it was the reason that it's being attacked is not because of its treatment of the people there. It's because Israel has been wanting to attack Iran for a long time. As I'm sure you know, the reason that we invaded Iraq was because Israel partisans and Israel itself pushed us into that disastrous war. This is well documented. Ever since that time, they've been trying to push us into a war against Iran. This has all been documented in many documents in Israel that have come out. Project for a New American Century, In Defense of the Realm are some of the documents. The Yanan Oded report that was calling for the destruction of Iran, Iraq, Syria, some of the other places.
Well, let me jump in here because we're almost out of time. Those are great comments, Alison. I'm going to bring in Tom Knowles quickly, but Jeffrey Sachs, U.S. economist out of Columbia University, has talked about Jewish American, by the way, has talked about the wars across the Middle East and what Israel or several folks within Israeli government have been wanting to see wars in the Middle East. I'm paraphrasing, but Jeffrey Sachs, for those of you that are interested, is what Alison is referring to.
I'd say also Hersheimer and Colonel Douglas McGregor.
Okay.
These are experts have been talking about this for a great deal of time.
So if you're interested in more of the Middle East, who wants to control the Middle East, Jeffrey Sachs and Professor Mearsheimer have a lot to say about that part of the world. They have many YouTube and Facebook posts that you can check out. I have
just have to when Colonel McGregor, he's really
and Colonel McGregor. Let me bring in Tom. Unless Kathy, you had a very brief comment.
No, actually, Alison covered it.
Okay, let me bring in Tom. Tom, you remember that after 9/11, there was a letter sent. I don't know who the Iranian president was at the time, but by the Iranian regime that says, and I heard this on a BBC program, years after 9/11, 2001, that said, hey, we've captured a few Al-Qaeda folks at the Iran-Afghanistan border, and we want to turn them over to you. This is our olive branch. We want United States to have use of Iran's airspace to go after these bad actors. There are enemies as much as yours. So according to this BBC article, the administration, and it may have been the vice presidents, and I'm not 100% sure on that, they get that communique and go, we do not talk to evil. And then shortly thereafter, Iran was labeled as part of the axis of evil. Do you remember that, Tom, back in 2002, 2003? You're on mute, by the way.
Got to be honest, I was extremely busy back in those days at the Bureau, involved in the terrorism war, and so no, wasn't paying a lot of attention to the media coverage. But at the same time, I mean, that wouldn't have surprised me back then because let's face it, the Hezbollah, Al Qaeda, you know, we're talking Shiite, Sunnis. This is really a complex and deep issue here. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my brother thing. It's just, it wouldn't surprise me if that was happening. And the Israelis, to get back on that point here, the Israelis, when you have a country calling for your destruction, obviously the Israelis have had a serious concern, a rightful serious concern about the Iranians for years. I mean, and if the Iranian regime did tone it down, if there was a regime change, there was a president in charge back there in Iran a few years back who was very, very open. And I was hoping, I was praying that there was going to be some solid changes. And unfortunately, he didn't last. But I mean, if there were a regime change and somebody that was open to the West, to the world, then this thing could really be tempered down and the country could grow. And like Trump had been saying, he wanted to see a prosperous Iran. But now we have fed into it by, I hate to hammer on this, but by him pulling out of that agreement. And Alison, that's the only thing I would disagree with you on. The IAEA just came out with a damning report saying that they were not they were violating the agreement, the non-proliferation agreement. That was 6 days ago that report came out. So I totally disagree with you on that one.
Well, read the report. Read the report in detail because you're getting a lot of reporting about it that is inaccurate. I would urge people to go to our website, ifamericans.org, ifamericans.org. We have a large section on Iran. It's all thoroughly documented. You can read there the facts that you're not getting from NPR, from CBS, from PBS, from all the places that you think you're getting the fact. You're getting largely spin and
not my sources of information.
So I suggest that you go to look at the videos by Colonel McGregor, by John Mearsheimer, by Jeffrey Sachs, by experts on the region. Read their books, go beyond what you're getting, and please just go to our website, ifamericans.org, look at the section about Iran, click those links, examine them, be skeptical, look into it for yourself, because what I'm hearing is repeating what I'm hearing the New York Times reporting, Washington Post is reporting, and those are not reliable sources. I used to think they were. I'm a journalist. I believe in journalism. My daughter's a journalist. When you know the facts, you see what's missing. Some people think they can read between the lines. They don't know how much is missing between the lines.
Thank you, Alison. Okay, let me move on. Bill has got a comment, but before we get to that, Inga put a great post up. Jeffrey Sachs just did an almost 2-hour interview with Tucker Carlson that is very informative. Tucker Carlson, by the way, a big MAGA person, has spoken many times about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Israeli-Iran issue. He's debated several folks. He's had, by the way, the first time I got exposed to Jeffrey Sachs was on Tucker Carlson's podcast. This is a few months ago, and there's Tucker Carlson and some of his comments about Israel's attack on Iran. Bill, you had a comment?
Yes, very quickly, not relying on anybody's reporting. I read the IAEA report today. It very clearly states that Iran, 3 weeks away from having enough enriched uranium to produce 9 weapons-grade bombs. That's very clear in the report. It's undisputable. I'm not relying on the New York Times, Washington Post, or anybody else. I read the report myself. Finally, just my observation on tonight. We're talking about problems in Israel. Even though it's supposed to be a democracy, it's more of a tyrannical dictatorship with Netanyahu doing whatever it takes to stay in power. We talk about Iran. They have elections that are as phony as can be. The supreme leader rules the country. In our country, we have a democracy, but we also have a man who wants to be king and a tyrant and is trampling all over the Constitution. The best way to stay out of these entanglements The best way to stay safe and prosperous is to respect the Constitution, follow the rule of law, don't complain, and win elections. Thank you.
Great commentary, Bill. And with that, that's a great intro to, there's a lot of folks that talk about, actually, let me bring up Alison's point about Iran. So the Shah was an authoritarian person. It was an authoritarian regime. If you spoke against the Shah in the 70s, you would disappear. But Iran was extremely economically successful. Incredible GDP growth year after year, expansion, and everything under the sun. Very prosperous country. Iran actually had to import labor from South Asia to take care of so many of its shortages of labor. So that's how fast Iran was growing. And first Ayatollah Khamenei, his promise was, I'm going to bring democracy to Iran. It's going to be free elections. I'm just going to be a backdrop. We're going to let the people decide what they want to do. He had a great cabinet that he put together. And one by one, most of his cabinet members, right after the revolution of 1979, disappeared, got killed, got tracked down by the regime. And the oppression of the Iranian people started. It was a bait and switch. It was the biggest Machiavellian move that happened in Iran. And Iran, again, you're going to ask yourself this question. Iranians are 20, 30% unemployment today, with almost 0% unemployment before the revolution. That's why 90% or 92% of Iranians despise what's happening in that country. And let me bring in the Iranian system. You have their IRGC, Revolutionary Guard, that connects with the Ayatollahs. They support each other. And if you want to be successful in Iran, you have to be connected to the regime. Like many countries. But there's been, a lot of disservice done to the Iranian people. By the way, you want to go after other countries, you want to go and conquer or, meddle in other countries in the Middle East, make sure your own backyard is clean. When so many Iranians oppose their own regime, they're choked off. Iranian women, some of them do, but a lot of them don't want to wear a headscarf. They want to act. Iran was a very open, yes, it was a, politically, maybe not politically, but a very open society. There's so many things. I mean, Tehran, city I grew up in, combination of Aspen, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Everything was available in Iran, and especially in Tehran. At the time, population 3.5 million. Today, closer to 15 million population. I hate to see that country get attacked, its infrastructure get destroyed. The best way, I'm going to say that again, it's going to mean nothing. My word's going to mean nothing. But the best way to remove the oppressive regime, let the Iranian people decide if they're oppressive. And Robert Warden had a great comment. He said, listen, drop a pallet of AK-47s into Iran and let the Iranians decide. They're armed. And if there's protests in the street, okay, now it's combat. Now, there's been...
Could I just point out a few things?
Sure, please.
One thing is that Israel has been wanting to take down Iran for a long time before the revolution and since that time. So in a number of years, they've been trying to specifically attack Iran. This was written about by Israel Shahak, who's a well-known Israeli author. He's passed away. He has a book about it called Open Secrets. The other thing that people should be aware of is that Israel does have the Iranian regime, and I'm not trying to, you certainly know much more about it in many ways, although I know some things that you're not mentioning. And, an expert, I think, could debate you quite effectively. It would be useful. But what's not, they have signed the non-proliferation agreement. Israel has not done that.
No, that's correct.
So
yeah.
Israel has 100.
Tom can verify that. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Perhaps as many as 400 nuclear weapons. They got that by stealing nuclear material from the United States. NUMEC, maybe you've read about that.
Yeah, I think those are
the United States. Most people feel that because of that, they can bully every other country in the region, which is what they do. They've attacked Lebanon many times. They've attacked Egypt. They've attacked the surrounding countries because they have the most powerful weapons, because we give them massive amounts of money and weaponry. They have nuclear weapons, and they don't want anybody to challenge them.
Great.
And then they press the Palestinians the way they've been doing for 75 years.
Well, and really, the occupation, which is, the root cause of so many of these issues in the Middle East, that every American president that I've been in these United States since the late 70s, has talked about a two-state solution. We all want a two-state solution, but it never happens. And you brought up the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, very strong.
Just one of many.
One of many. Okay. So, and they help many congressmen and women get into office. And I don't blame them. They go, this
Helped
group.
Trump get into office. They helped Biden get into office.
Well, they spent a lot of money. I don't know how much money. Actually, we have they spent a couple $100 million. I don't know, several $100 million in the last few years. But if they've helped members of Congress get into office over the years, and here's a question I have for the folks in the Middle East, because everybody goes, oh my gosh, the Israeli lobby, Israeli lobby. These are very smart people. They know how to influence policy. They how to help people get into office. And if you've been in a couple of tough races and you eventually got into Congress with the help of the Israeli lobby, and you go, where's the Arab lobby? Forget Palestinians, because unfortunately they're not organized. They don't have money. They're occupied. They're starving to death themselves. But there's a lot of money, oil money in the Arab world. I don't see it, how do you say, not AIPAC, American, Saudi, ACEPAC. I don't see Saudis or Kuwaitis or other Arab countries that have lots of cash connect and go, okay, we got to help get the people that are more aligned with this level of thinking into office. So if you can't influence policy, if you're not in the arena, if you're not in, you don't have influence over politics, you're not in the arena. So
well, we're talking about people who live in this country. So it doesn't matter how much money the Saudis have. We're talking about the domestic.
Well, I'm talking about, AIPAC raises money. I mean, Saudis, there are Saudis in the United States. There's no other movement that I know that is, now you said there's more than just AIPAC. There's many other Israeli organizations, but they're organized. They know how, they work hard. They volunteer for members of Congress.
They're very, very central to the media, so we don't hear about it very often.
Yeah, they're very central to the. Look at Tucker Carlson when he was with Fox News. He was speaking from a very different perspective than he is now when he has his own podcast, and that's a beautiful thing with our country. You can have, and he's a big MAGA guy. He's talking about a different perspective, different approach, and he's putting, and him and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, there's the folks that have been very vocal over the last 5 to 7 days. Hey, we supported Trump because he said, well, no more wars. We're not going to get a U.S. military equipment involved in the Middle East or any other place, including Ukraine, by the way. But, by the way, what I see at least, most of the very active voices in support of the Palestinian causes in Gaza are Jewish Americans. I see them all over the Washington, D.C. I see them protesting in Europe. They're very active. They're organized. And Jewish Americans are the ones that are supporting Palestinians and their causes, and they're going to Congress. Yeah.
And Christian Americans and Asian Americans.
Yes, and yes, correct.
It's a very diverse movement, very diverse movement. People on the left, people on the right. All it means is once people know the facts, those are who join this movement. It's not dominated by one single group.
No, there's a lot of different folks. Let me get to a couple of comments, and then we'll wrap up with. Oh, Kathy has got a question, but I'm going to get to Kathy. Linda Carter, I assume you know that the planes and servicemen are leaving Lemoore for the aircraft carrier to go to Iran. Doris, do you think Trump will attack Iran? That's a good question. I hope not, because it'll messy things up in the Middle East. I don't know where this thing is going to go. I really, really hope not. First administration, I watched Chris Cuomo on News Station, which I think is a good program. He has people from the left, right, and he seems to be in the center. Tries to put the facts out there. Anyone else watch this? Okay. Who had their hands up? Kathy, you have a question? We were
No,
going to talk about. Oh, go ahead.
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you're saying about the Israel lobby is very troubling to me. The Israel lobby is lobbying for a foreign country. They're not lobbying for what's good for Americans. They're not even like NRA is at least lobbying for Americans owning guns. You know, the big pharma is lobbying for pharmaceuticals in the US, but the Israel lobby is not even lobbying for our country. And they should be registered. What is the name of that group?
Foreign agents.
As a foreign agent. Yeah. So the fact that they have a lot of money and they're well organized, you know, that explains their success, but that doesn't mean that's okay. And what they're doing is they're getting politicians to support genocide. We're not talking about an American policy right now. This is genocide. This is a human rights issue, not a political issue. The Israel lobby is helping the United States to support genocide. There's no excuse for that. Even if they're well organized and well funded, it's genocide.
I think a lot of folks didn't a lot of other countries also call it that. Well, I mean, hey, there's a lot of 50. We used to cover that every week. I mean, it's getting old news. Over 50,000 killed, many children, 15 to 20,000 children over the last year. Well, since October 8th or 9th or 10th of 2023. And that's really something that everybody, it's going to be difficult to go, gosh, we're supporting that war and that many people are getting killed. I don't understand why U.S. lawmakers and Israeli lawmakers don't put an end to this. I don't, because it's against American values and Israeli values.
It's because the Israel lobby owns these politicians. That's why they're not speaking up against it. It's not because they can't figure it out. It's not because they don't care. They're owned by the Israel lobby.
For the
And the media is covering it up much more than everybody realizes.
Say that again, Allison.
The U.S. media consistently give filtered coverage for even PBS, which people think is reliable. There was a great March of Return that went on for almost 2 years. Every week, hundreds, sometimes thousands of Gazans gathered to have, they wanted a Gandhian march. People kept saying they had little ones, they'd always had little ones. They said, no, if there's a massive one, we'll have this huge march. They did it every week for 86 weeks in a row. People were killed every single week, many of them children, many of them women, medics, journalists, etc. Numerous people have amputations from it or lifelong disabilities. This went on for 86 weeks. They used nonviolence before finally Hamas resorted to violence. So 86 weeks of nonviolence, the media barely even touched about it. PBS was finally going to do a documentary about it. It was produced by PBS combined with BBC. At the last minute, they pulled the plug and said, well, it's postponed. Then eventually they admitted they would never show it. So BBC showed it. In England, they saw that documentary. We did not see it. So 86 straight weeks of nonviolent, unarmed demonstrations, getting killed, getting massacred, getting maimed, and it was completely ignored by the United States because we didn't even know about it.
Great point. Thank you for that, Allison. Bill, comment from you, and then we got to go around the table. Final comments from everybody. We'll start with Allison. But Bill, question, comment.
I don't have a comment. I have a question for Allison. She's been at this a long time. There has been a shift in American sentiment on this. It hasn't been reflected in Congress, but where do you see the American people being right now when it comes to Israel and Palestinians, especially with what has happened with Israel's response in the mass killing of women and children?
I agree with you. There's been, in the, something like almost 25 years I've been working on this, there's been a steady and now cataclysmic change in American views among progressives, people, the liberal progressive half of the country, even though it, as you said, isn't reflected yet in any policies because the politicians are largely owned, as Kathy just said. But the grassroots is definitely much more supportive of Palestinians than they ever were before. This last 2 years of open mass slaughter that you can see if you just go on alternative media, you can see, all the videos of children, etc. However, the conservative media, unfortunately, and I don't, conservative media covers some things better, I feel, than liberal media does. But in this particular case, they are not covering this honestly. They omit things, they give people spin, they talk about the hostages, which is significant. They never talk about the thousands of Palestinian prisoners, the torture of prisoners, etc. So I feel among the liberal half of the country, more and more people are aware of this issue as never before. The conservative half, much less so, but it's major because now Tucker Carlson, who's not on TV, but he's highly influential, and more people on the conservative half are speaking out against the Iran war. They're speaking out now saying that Israel pushed us into the Iraq war, and they're trying to push us into an Iran war. So that's hopeful that they're at least speaking out about that part.
Let me follow-up question, Allison. Where do you think people can go? And we cover a lot of stuff in the Middle East mainly through Reuters and occasionally through Haaretz when we have permission to share their stories. Where do you think people can go to get more unsensationalized and fact-based information about what's happening in the Middle East?
Mainly alternative media. Haaretz, the Israeli daily newspaper, is very good. It's worth a subscription. We have one. So we publish lots of, you can come to our website, because what we do is we aggregate reports from a number of different places, including Haaretz, Palestinian media. Most Western media will occasionally have very good articles. It will seem that they're covering it neutrally and objectively, but when you know what's going on, they're still definitely tilting towards Israel. It's always hard. Democracy Now! Has good coverage. They now have good coverage, so that's one place. I can't recommend any of the major newspapers, unfortunately, or any of the major networks. I cannot really recommend any of them, even though at times they do have valuable reports, quite often. But overall, the spin is usually there, and that's what people don't see. They don't know when they're getting spin. Intelligent people.
Got it.
I didn't know that, I woke up to this very late in my life.
Got it. Thank you for that. Again, we have an image of Tucker Carlson. He has a great podcast, for those of you that haven't seen it, available on YouTube. Clips of it is available on Facebook. Great commentary. He debates and interviews a lot of very intelligent people, including Jeffrey Sachs, American economist, who is a brilliant person, by the way. He's spoken to the European Parliament. He sets up currency models for different countries. Brilliant American person.
Very interesting background.
What is that?
Very interesting.
With Jeffrey Sachs and of course Tucker Carlson. Okay, with that, we're going to go to closing comments, 1 minute or less. We'll start with you, Allison, Kathy, Tom, Bill, and I'll wrap it up. What is your
Well,
1 minute message for the GB Wire audience, mainly Central California? And I can tell you there's a lot of law enforcement folks that watch this program outside of our retired Tom Knowles, who used to be with law enforcement.
I guess my 1 minute I would use to just say, go to our website. That's where we aggregate lots of material. It comes, it's always, I think, factual, and you can read it for yourself. I just say, go to the If Americans Knew website, go to our daily blog where we post things every day, look at our statistics. Look at we have a YouTube video channel. Please look at those videos. We have a lot about the lobby. We have a lot about Israel, Gaza, Iran, etc. So that's the place. It's not that we're doing a great job. It's luck. Sometimes there are articles. Sometimes they're mine or Kathy's or other people's. But often there are other people that have written excellent things or produced excellent things. We gather them onto our website.
Got it. Thank you. Kathy?
Yeah, I would agree with Allison that we know that there is so much more information about Israel and Palestine out there than what the mainstream media covers. And we know that what they do cover is often full of holes and has a pro-Israel bias to it. I've been reading these for years, and when you know what you're looking for, you can see the Israel bias is there. And so since the beginning of the Gaza war, we've been putting out a daily update every single day that covers accurately and factually the news out of Palestine, out of Gaza, out of Israel, what's going on in the US, what's going on in Europe in terms of the Israel and Palestine conflict. And it's not that hard to figure out. IsraelPalestine.org. IsraelPalestine.org. It's very simple to get started to understand this conflict. It's not that complicated. You just have to jump in and get started. And I think our blog is a really good place to do that.
Thank you, Kathy. I actually have a question. Kathy kind of inspired me to ask this question of Allison. Why should Americans, because your website is If Americans Knew, why should Americans care about what happens in Israel, Gaza? 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of the oil used to flow, well, Europe and United States. Now we don't, United States for sure doesn't need Persian Gulf oil, to the best of my ability. We actually are the largest producer and also the largest consumer of oil. But why should Americans care about what happens with what Israel does to its neighbors?
There are two reasons.
Okay.
One reason is, I think, the just humane, moral reason that we should and do care about other people. I think many people feel, well, what the Nazis did was horrible. If I were back then, I would have stopped it and opposed it. So I think we feel there's a moral imperative to, when children are being killed and tortured, that we should do something about it in general. However, in this case, there's a much more significant reason. They're using our money to do this. Our tax money is being used to create misery, to intentionally create misery, as we're seeing in Gaza, to intentionally starve people to death. Our money is doing that. Our weaponry is doing that. Now, that should matter to people. I think it matters to me, matters to most people I find that actually know about that. If that doesn't matter to you, it's out of sight, out of mind. That you can live that way if you want to. However, this is creating great hostility to the United States. You cannot do this. You cannot fund what Israel is doing. You cannot attack Iraq and destroy Iraq, get Israel to push us into attacking Iran, destroying Iran, and think that you can get away with it forever. So I have 8 grandchildren. I want them to live in a prosperous, safe, honorable country, and these policies are endangering their future.
I think basically what you're saying is that we used to go and liberate people from concentration camps back in Second World War from the Nazi occupation, and now we're kind of aiding another country that is bombing with our money. And then your point is our dollars are being used, taxpayer dollars being used to occupy and kill other people, some of who are civilians. Is that
Oh,
correct?
the
What is it?
majority are, the majority are always civilians, women and children. That's what's going on right now in Iran, but certainly in Gaza. All the reports, all of this is very clear. The majority of people being killed are women and children, old men. They've destroyed pretty much all of the hospitals. They're killing doctors. This was already an open air prison. It was already Gaza. You could not get in and out of Gaza without it going through armed Israeli guards, and they usually did not let you out or let you in. I had a very hard time when I got in, even back, in early 2000. So Israel's been shooting, and the people in Gaza they've had Israel prevents, before the last 2 years, Israel was long preventing materials from getting into Gaza. There were reports in the 1990s about what was happening with Gaza. Not enough food, not enough materials. There was children's growth was being stunted at times. It wasn't the type of famine where you get distended bellies, but there's malnutrition because Israel was not letting materials in. This has gone on for a very long time.
Yeah. Thank you, Alison. Tom, final comments? And I know we got more than 1 minute each, but what are your final thoughts that you want to share with the GVWire Unfiltered audience?
First of all, that I would agree unequivocally with 90% of what Allison and Kathy have said regarding the bias that's shown towards the Israeli government especially by U.S. media, but U.S. politicians. I covered that part of the world. I worked in that area. I worked with the Israeli government. I worked back in the days with the Palestinian Authority when they were first created, helping them. We taught them how to be investigators. So I spent a lot of time in the West Bank, a little bit of time in the Gaza, working with the authorities over there. I mean, it's a very sad what's going on in the Gaza is just beyond my capacity to even absorb it and how we are allowing it. And that's where I agree with the weapons and the support. And it's got to change. It just has to change. I'm always so torn between this because I have been working it for over 35 years, and I feel for both sides on the Iranian-Israeli thing. I mean, it's just a mess, and until some civil minds try to prevail here and quit living and talking entirely upon the past, and quit making today's decisions based upon actions of the past and start looking forward for those kids, for those grandkids, to say, how can we make this a better world? Until we get some people in office on both sides that are willing to do that. I mean, this is a problem that's been going on a millennium, going back to the Israeli-Palestinian issue for several millennium now. So, I mean, it's got to stop.
Not millennia. We're talking about the late 1890s.
No, Kathy, we're okay. I mean, Allison, all right. We'll agree to disagree on that.
It's not millennium. Nobody says that.
Okay, let me, I'm going to get to Bill, but I have a question for Tom. Tom, does the fact that war, I go to Dwight Eisenhower's farewell speech that said, hey, there's the military industrial complex, once it's fed, it's going to be really difficult to turn that tab off. Does that have anything to do with all the conflicts, all over the world that are never ending?
Well, that's not something that I've ever had my fingerprints on, so I can't say with absolute certainty. I can only say what I've heard and what I've borne witness to, and it does. I mean, we're the #1 arms provider in the world. I don't know what else to say about that. We send weapons all over the world, and then we try to crucify the people that are buying the weapons instead of those that are manufacturing the weapons. So, that's at a level of conversation much higher than my pay grade ever was.
Thank you for those insights. Bill McEwen?
Yeah, just very quickly, what to look for. Well, first, Netanyahu has played Biden and Trump like a Stradivarius. You read a TikTok of the negotiations and the talks between Trump and Netanyahu. Netanyahu's playing chess, Trump's playing checkers, and probably very badly. And the next thing that our viewers should look for, the next big decision is, will Trump order our planes to start refueling the Israeli combat jets? And will we deliver the 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs that could be used in an attempt to take down the nuclear facility at Fort Dow? Very simple. That's the next step. Americans should weigh in. They should make their feelings known, and they should hope that President Trump's pride and his advisors tell him it's time for him to tell Netanyahu no.
Got it. Thank you, Bill. You can put that slide off. Okay. And here's my final comments. You know, Iran and Israel had a long-standing relationship before the revolution took place in 1979. Alison is correct, well, to some extent, that the Shah of Iran was talking about the Israeli lobby and its influence over U.S. politicians and U.S. media. He did an interview, for those of you that are interested in watching that, with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes back in 1977. And he articulates that that the Israeli lobby is influence over U.S. media and U.S. politicians is actually bad for Israel, its existence, its growth, and its relationship with its neighbors. But Iran had a very friendly relationship with Israel. When I was growing up in Iran, there was a lot of Jewish Iranians. As a matter of fact, almost half of my classmates, not quite half, were Iranian Jews. And at the same time, there was wars with Egypt and Israel and Jordan. And yes, what is that famous war? Tom probably knows the details on that. Was it 1972 where Egyptians were almost at the doorsteps of Tel Aviv and they retreated? The rumors were that the Israelis said, hey, we have a nuclear bomb. We're going to nuke Cairo unless you retreat. And so they had a nuclear program back in the late 60s or early 70s. Those are the rumors. And yes, they have.
That was 1973. Kissinger was so afraid that Dayan was panicking that he was going to use nuclear weapons that they gave it. There was a major airlift of U.S. weaponry to Israel. People, the forces in Europe felt that they were undersupplied because all the weaponry was being sent to Israel.
So the really sad part about the Middle East, and now there's been many Israeli historians, or at least several, some who have come to Fresno. Ilan Pappé was in Fresno over a decade ago and talked about he's the son of an army general in Israel. He's talked about, am I saying it wrong? Okay.
That's Miko Peled, but you've got the idea.
Okay. What was his name?
Excellent.
Miko Peled.
Miko Peled. I'm sorry, Miko Peled. Okay.
It's really a scholar.
A scholar, and has talked about the challenge with Israel and all its neighbors, starting in 1948. The removal and making Palestinians refugees in all these surrounding countries. I actually have met third generation in my travels in the Middle East. This is over a decade ago. Palestinian folks that lived in refugee camps in Jordan, third generation refugees, born and raised in tents. So that's not really the way to live. No, none of us want to live under occupation, and it's really disheartening that there's so much.
Because Israel won't let them back.
Because what?
Israel won't let them back, unlike other countries.
So,
and just to mention one thing, because since you're mentioning Ilan Pappé and respect him as do I and most people, do you remember the title of his major book?
No.
The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine.
The ethnic cleansing?
Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine.
What was the author's name? I got the name wrong. What was it?
Ilan Pappé.
Ilan Pappé. Okay. Was he the son of the army general? No, I got it wrong. Okay.
That's Nico Pellet.
Okay, so let me wrap up. We're 40 minutes over, but we have a lot of audience that's still on with a few great comments. It's unfortunate that what's happened with the treatment of Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, not only in the last 5 years or 2 years, but in the last 40 years, last 60 years. President Carter wrote a book. What was the headline? What was the name of the book? Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. That Gaza is the largest open air prison in the world, according to the late president Jimmy Carter. And this is not can't be Israeli values because Israel is a democracy. If I'm assuming it's not a democracy. Okay, Kathy's saying no, but in this is Israel supported by America, a lot of American dollars, a lot of American support and technology. And our values are not occupying people. Our values are liberating people. And that's the unfortunate part. Now, yes, Hamas, I don't know Hamas. We've seen them. We don't get somebody from them to come on, US media and talk about their perspective, but they oppress their own people. If you're living in Gaza, and hold on, let me finish, please, Alison. Let me finish. If you're living in Gaza, you have to get food from them because nothing can go in or out of Gaza without going through Hamas because of the Israeli blockade. Okay, Kathy and Alison are going to correct me in a minute, but there was a protest against Hamas in Gaza a couple of months ago.
Yes.
If Hamas hadn't talked about destruction of Israel, I would sit down and talk about how to have a good relationship with Israel. And I know there have been a lot of, Alison and you have talked about that, but about peaceful protests. And if Iran had the same approach to Israel, hey, listen, Israel is a small country, but a lot of money, a lot of technology, a lot of brain power comes out of Israel. So how do you guys coexist and work together? It's substantially above my pay grade, and it's really a shame to see what's happening in that part of the world. It sounds like I have to give the last word to Alison because she's got a lot of comments and she's going to correct me appropriately. But go ahead, Alison.
Then I will share my comment with Kathy because she's extremely knowledgeable about
Well,
that.
Kathy, go ahead.
As we've pointed out, you're saying if they did this, well, they did it, but you didn't hear about it. So remember, you're hearing about the violent actions. You hear about one day of massive violence by Hamas and by others that broke out of the open air prison. It's like if, people broke out of the Warsaw Ghetto, what they might have done to their jailers. So you heard about that one day of violence. You didn't hear the 86 weeks of nonviolence. So remember that what you're speaking about is really not, you're missing major information. It's not your fault. It's very hard to find. So I'll let Kathy go on.
Yeah, and in terms of the food in Gaza, it's been revealed more and more over the last couple of weeks, and it's been reported by just about everybody, including mainstream media here, that Israel has basically hired some gangs in Gaza, gangs of Palestinians in Gaza, and got them to do the dirty work of stealing and looting aid and stockpiling aid. It's not Hamas. Hamas has always said that's not us. And now we know that it's not Hamas that's been doing that. Hamas has been doing the best they can fighting against Israel, occupier and oppressor. Israel has been starving the people of Gaza for.
Yes, I mean that's well documented.
Hamas, but it's not Hamas that's doing it. That's what
I just want to point out. There's an excellent documentary that we have on our website. It's long, so we've made it into pieces on our website that was produced by a British director for Al Jazeera. It's it looks at the October 7th attack and shows which things were factual about the attack, which of the claims about it were non-factual. It also, there you do hear, we never hear from a Hamas. You never hear what they have to say But you can hear them because they're available to talk to. So I encourage you to go to see this documentary on our website.
What's the name of it?
Um,
It's on your website, If Americans Knew. Okay.
It's on our website, it's on our YouTube. Go to If Americans Knew YouTube channel, and you'll find it there.
Okay.
There is a website that interviews Hamas members. They're really good. It's called Drop Site News.
Got it. Okay. Couple of last comments and we're out of here. Jimmy Martinez, it said, so Israel has been committing genocide for decades against Palestine and killing thousands and thousands, but now Israel is on the receiving side and we're supposed to feel sorry for them? Yeah, no. Virgo, Natalie, it's so sad to see them suffering and dying. I'm very supportive towards Iran, and so should many others because they are. It's a long one. I don't think I'm going to get to all of it. I'm very supportive towards Iran, and so should many others because they are very spiritual people who pray through good and bad. I donate every month to help with food. May peace be upon us all and stop all this evil. Please, hey, Hub, donate food. Any other long commentary on Facebook? Thank you all for watching. By the way, media doesn't get allowed to go into, hasn't been for many years, not just the last year, decades to get into Gaza. And I'm sure the West Bank, who's that American journalist, Peter Beinart, a Jewish American that was not allowed first to get into Israel, but eventually I think they let him in. There's so much potential to come out of that part of the world, and I'm just really disappointed that so many things have come together to create such a mess. And unfortunately, there's no leadership on the United States, which is the richest country in the world, to go in and say, here's how we're going to bring peace to that part of the world and dictate a peaceful solution without bias. Now, we know that's going to be really hard for that to happen because of so much influence over members of many members of Congress, by the way. So it is unfortunate. And I'm thinking you're sitting after you've gotten out of office for a year or 2 or 10 years, you're going to look back and go, you know, especially as president, I had a lot of authority. I could have done so much to bring peace and prosperity to so many people. But you know what? I wanted there was so much pressure on me to go a different route. So I hope that folks look at Christian values, Jewish values, and Islamic values, and really moral values, values of our country, to bring peace and prosperity, to spread peace and prosperity throughout the world, and be a police for peace and prosperity. With that, I want to thank Alison Weir, Kathy, Shahada, and Tom Knowles. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the longest show we've had. Great commentary, great information. I hope to have you back very soon. I have a feeling that the conflicts in the Middle East will not go away. Tom, Allison, and Kathy, do I have your commitment to come back in the next few weeks to have an update for everybody?
Yes, sure.
Yes. Tom? Tom says, well, okay, if I have to.
Yeah, we'll talk.
We'll talk, okay. And Kathy, and Bill McEwen, our news director. Great commentary. Thank you all. Thank you to all of our viewers. Have a great evening. It's going to be much nicer weather for the next few days. Enjoy the week. See you all next Tuesday.